Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Thursday morning's webinar with Go for Growth. We are looking today at digital procurement technology, data, and AI. For those that haven't joined a Go for Growth webinar before, my name is Gillian Askew. I'm one of three co-founding directors of Go for Growth. And we've got a number of people booked on today. So just as people are joining, I'll do some quick housekeeping pieces. As I said, I'm part of Go for Growth. We are a social enterprise and we are designed to work both with our procurement colleagues in both public and private sector and the marketplace, those suppliers, providers, smaller organisations, voluntary sector organisations, really to help people be able to take part in procurement competitions, funding opportunities, whether that's grant funding, public sector procurement, private sector tender opportunities. As always, we are on Zoom, and so the Q&A functionality and the chat functionality are both enabled today. So please feel free to use both. If you would like to say hi and introduce yourself, please feel free. There is no mandation there, though, if you would rather not. But you can say hi and introduce yourself on the chat if you would like. If you do have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A if possible. I have carved out some time at the end for Q&A, but do feel free to jump in as we go. If you are chatting in the chat functionality, the settings are either for hosts and panelists or for everyone. So if you want everyone to see what you're chatting about, make sure you set it to the right thing. And over the next 30 minutes or so, we'll be covering the topics that you can see on the screen. So we'll be looking at digital procurement, big data, reporting versus insights, transparency and trust. And then we'll be focusing towards the back end a little bit more on how we might use AI, both in procurement processes and in the bid processes as a bidder. So we'll have a quick look through both lenses as a procurer and also as a bidder. So hopefully that is what everyone was expecting today. So let's get started. So the core of our discussion today is around this is digitization, digital procurement. It is more than just artificial intelligence. Granted, AI is what we're talking about most often today, but digital procurement's not necessarily new. When we talk about digital procurement, it's crucial to recognize that it's not just about adopting new tools or new software, and it's certainly not just about artificial intelligence. Instead, what it actually represents is a fundamental shift in how we make decisions and how we operate on a day-to-day basis through our business as usual processes. So in procurement, what this means is that we've been moving from being document-led to data-led. So for public sector buyers, for example, and buyers in most sectors, that means looking beyond those static PDFs of just a tender response in isolation, and instead analysing the underlying data trends across multiple procurements. For suppliers, and especially for micro, small and medium enterprises, MSMEs, and voluntary community and social enterprises, VCSEs, that probably means understanding your performance, things like your social value contributions and your compliance. And they're increasingly being tracked at that macro level as continuous data points rather than solely a point in time evaluation, either during a bid or contract performance. And that's really good, because it helps us in procurement and it helps the marketplace respond to better procurements going forward. It helps us build better procurements, that data and that intelligence, and therefore better procurements elicit better results out of the marketplace. Automation is a big shift, but its purpose is to streamline processes, not to replace people. And I guess there is a fear factor around technology, digitization, and especially around AI. And are we thinking that the digital revolution means that actually we no longer are needed and AI can do everything or tech can do everything? It can't. And there are industries where we see actually it becomes so less human-led that we miss out on some of that richness of human relationship. Recruitment industry might be one that we would think about that. But automation in and of itself, its purpose is to streamline processes, not to replace people. So it frees up procurement professionals the time that we've got to focus on that strategic relationship building, on where we add value. And from a supplier perspective, it allows suppliers to spend less time on administrative portals and more time delivering the outcomes and the value that we intend to get through those procurements. In addition, true digital transformation requires integration across all of the systems, including finance, contracts, supplier management, HR, etc., etc. However, there is a stark reality that we probably have to acknowledge here. If our data is poor in any organization, then there's a tentative link, or actually sometimes a really explicit link, that if your data is poor, your decisions might well be poor too. If your underlying processes are broken or overly bureaucratic, adding technology in actually sometimes can only scale those problems faster. So ultimately, any digital transformation is a changing the operating model, and it therefore requires cultural adaptation from both buyers and suppliers. So if we break down where technology actually sits within our typical operations in procurement, we can view this as a stack of layers. And understanding this stack is vital for both sides of the procurement table. So at the foundation of all of this, and it shows at the top in the list, but actually it would sit at the bottom, creating that bedrock, that foundation, that's the data layer. So it encompasses our spend, our suppliers, our contracts, our key performance indicators, KPIs. It is that bedrock of everything. And then we build on top of that. So next is the systems layer. That includes things like the e-procurement portals that we work on, our finance ERP systems, the enterprise resource planning systems, and contract management type platforms. Those are the tools that we interact with daily for our business as usual activities. Then there's an analytics layer. So that's where dashboards and reporting turn that raw data into actionable insights. We have an automation layer that we've talked about, and that's all about handling workflows, approvals, and alerts, trying to keep those processes moving efficiently and make sure that our human interventions are where they're most valuable and where they're most needed. And then at the top, excuse me, is the AI layer. And that assists with all manner of activities in procurement these days. So it can assist in drafting bids, for example, in building specifications, in evaluating procurements, in reviewing tenders. And it will also be quite useful in recognizing patterns. So understanding where gaps are, understanding where trends are, understanding where those patterns are evolving. For buyers, I think the message is that the AI layer is only as strong as the data and the systems that sit beneath it. So you can't build effective AI on a foundation of messy data. For suppliers, understanding the stack of how this all knits together can often help demystify how your bids and your performance data are used and processed and how they help build ongoing future procurements. Across the board, for all of us, all our intelligence basically feeds into this huge ecosystem of data and technology, eventually informing the analytics and the AI layers that shape future procurement. So if we think about big data, I mean, it's a buzzword that we hear constantly in a minute. But what are we actually tracking in procurement? So we focus primarily, and this won't be true for every organisation, so this is a huge generalisation, but excuse me, sorry. We tend to focus on 4 key areas. Spend analysis, so we want to know where public money goes. And actually in any organisation, whether you're public or private sector, knowing what you're spending your money on, I've been in procurement 31 years. And I've been analysing spend for 31 years. So this is not new to anyone in procurement, and it is not sector specific. If we're spending money on behalf of an organisation, we want to know who we're spending it with, how much of it we're spending. And then we also want to think about who those suppliers are. that we're spending with, how we rely on them, and what their resilience looks like in the market. And of course, we want to know about our performance. So contract data to understand the commitments that we have made, the outcomes that we have designed for in those procurements. And then the performance data to measure what we're actually getting versus what was promised through those procurement commitments. And tracking those elements enables us to make significantly better sourcing decisions. So if we think procurement is just one giant continuous cycle, actually, so if you're in public procurement, non-defence and non-utilities, typically, and the Procurement Act has changed some of this, but typically you'll be used to seeing 4-year type contract terms. An open framework can now last up to 8 years, and a dynamic purchasing system and a dynamic market, of course, can be much longer than that. And you will often see really long contracts in defence or utilities. But typically, you might see the most common framework length has usually been in public sector anyhow, around 4 years. And that whole cycle just repeats. So what do we know? What did we learn? How do we factor that in? What's our data? What was the performance? Did we achieve what we set out to achieve? Do we need to tweak anything? Has the market changed? Has the service user changed? Have the outcomes changed? And it all feeds into that loop. And all of that is data driven. So that ability to track and feed it into sourcing decisions allows buyers to identify things like new supply chain risks really early on, track social value commitments robustly, and even measure more complex metrics around the environment. So, for example, Scope 3 purchase goods and services for carbon emissions, which can be hugely volumatic. For MSMEs, micro and small medium enterprises, and VCSEs, voluntary community and social enterprises, this actually is a real opportunity. So when public sector buyers have better data, they can easily identify the unique value and agility that smaller, local or socially focused enterprises can bring to the table. And one of the main takeaways, I think, for me, and I'm interested to know if people agree with this or not, most organisations don't lack data. What they often lack is usable data that is used to drive actions and decision-making processes. So structuring your data, whether you're a buyer, defining a spec, or a supplier, proving your track record, for example, structuring your data can be a huge competitive advantage, both sides of the table. And this slide serves to highlight the essence of the digital shift. So historically, procurement has been heavily focused on retrospective reporting. So asking questions like, how much did we spend last quarter? Did the supplier meet the SLA? What we've seen in terms of the direction of travel is a shift towards generating forward-looking insights. So we need to ask much more proactive questions such as, what should we do next based on these trends or these patterns that we're seeing? And evaluate how our data has driven our decisions going forward. And in procurement, we have supplier performance and strategic supplier relationship management. And recently, somebody asked me what the difference was. And I think one of the key differences is which way the lens looks. So supplier performance is how did we do? And that's a backward look. So did we do what we said we would do? Strategic supplier relationship management is forwards looking. What are we wanting to do in the future? What is innovation? What's next? And that is how data can get really useful to us, whether it comes from the supplier or from the procurement organisation. So for the public sector, that means using data to shape future markets, to design better interventions going forward. For suppliers, it means that buyers are looking for partners who can provide those insights, not just the goods and services or works that we're actually procuring here, but the insights and the intelligence that will help inform that future lens. Buyers want to know how our delivery as providers will help them achieve their long-term strategic goals and backed by data. And in a bid environment, that evidence lens is absolutely crucial. And I'll talk about that in a second. So it's about, I guess, moving from a reactive, compliance-driven stance to a proactive, strategic partnership type engagement model, regardless of the value or complexity of the procurement. Procurement itself as a profession has been moving from that adversarial, I will buy from you, I therefore am the customer, you will do what I ask for, to a much more strategic and partnership type engagement model where actually we say to the market, who are the artisans, the experts? Here's what we're trying to achieve. What's the best way to do that? What's your capacity? What's the capability? What's new? What don't we know? And how do we together collaboratively, with cohesion across all of these conflicting requirements that we have in procurement, how do we use that data and intelligence to really help ourselves come together to work together to deliver better information? And as we digitize more, we have to rigorously address transparency and trust. And it's a common misconception, I think, that going digital automatically makes a process transparent. In reality, complex algorithms can actually obscure decision making if we're not careful. To build trust, audit trails must be built into our systems from the start. So our decisions, whether we're, and this is especially true in the public sector, but in any procurement department, regardless of sector, our decisions must be explainable and defensible. And that's super critical in public procurement, where fairness, accountability, equity are paramount. So any outputs that are generated by AI, so for example, in procurement evaluations, they must be reviewable by human experts, and the underlying data sources must be clearly understood. Governance frameworks, therefore, have to evolve alongside the technology. So for suppliers, this means you have the right to understand how your bids are evaluated. And in public procurement, it's very clear in the documentation what the organisation is looking for in terms of the specification, the scoring criteria, how the scores are therefore defined. And that's true even if AI tools are used in the process. Your right to know how you will be scored doesn't change. For buyers, a good rule of thumb is, I think, if you can't explain to a supplier how a decision was made, you probably shouldn't be using that system or that process. So trust is the currency that sits at the core of good procurement, and technology must enhance that trust, not ever undermine it. So I don't know if anybody's ever joined one of our bid skills workshops, but I've just got two slides just to frame some of the context of all of this. When we're in a bid environment, a competition environment, and even in a grant funding environment, effectively we're answering questions where we're linking back to the specification, but we're answering questions and we get scored on those answered, and based on our scores we'll either join a framework, join a dynamic market, a dynamic purchasing system, or we'll be awarded a contract in some way, shape or form. And there is an approach to that we think is quite useful. It's a very subjective process, so you'll find your own way. But when we are coaching on bid skills, this is what we talk about. And this will frame the next section when we think about using artificial intelligence. So when we're answering questions, and I've got a slide that brings this to life next, what we're really looking for is the doing words, the verb elements of the question. We only want to answer the question that we've been asked. And that sounds dead easy and so self-explanatory and so obvious, but actually it's much harder in a bid situation than you might think if you've not done it before. We don't need to repeat the question, and we only need to answer the question. And I remember once answering a bid for a public sector organisation. They had not asked anywhere in the bid, it's a long time ago now, about social value. And I really wanted to tell them what my business was doing on social value. And I absolutely had to hold myself back, because although I thought what we were doing was wonderful, it hadn't been asked about. And so trying to shoehorn it in to a question answer would have cost me scores, not created me scores. So we do always want to ask ourselves, have I answered and only answered the question that's been asked? And we want to ask ourselves the so what of that. So if you're writing, we are great at doing something, ask yourself, really, am I? How are we? How am I showing that to you? Have I done it before? Can I show you evidence of what we've already done? Or can I show you evidence of how we will go on to do that? So think about that evidence trail. If we're making a claim or saying we do something or saying we will do something, then how will we do that? How have we done that? How do we back that up with evidence? A bit like a job application. Do we have the skills? Have we tried and tested those skills? Will we have those skills in the future? And there are some constraints often in procurement. So you might find that there is a word count or a page count. So if there's a page count, normally there'll be a font size stipulated so that everybody has the same amount of words on a page. Um, Make sure that you adhere to those constraints. It might say no tables, no pictures, no additional documents, no attachments. 2 pages of A4 in font size Arial 12 or 500 words. If you go over any of those things, at best, it'll just be redacted and the evaluator will never see it. At worst, you could be excluded for a non-compliant bid. And that's what we don't want. So we don't want to repeat the question, especially if we've got a word or a page count, because we're just taking valuable space. We do want to, however, make sure that we answer all of the questions. Let me show you what this looks like in practice. These are real questions from a real procurement. It's a past one now, but when I first started coaching on this, it was live. So this is in the care sector, but there are 3 questions on there. What you can see in yellow are the doing elements that I talked about. So if we take that first one, it says, how do you ensure that care plans are individually tailored and person-centred and meet the needs and outcomes of the person? Within your answer, please state how you ensure that care plans are kept up to date, what measures you have in place to ensure that people are involved in their care planning, and how you link with partners to ensure that needs are met. 6 doing elements of that question. And when we're writing our answer, we can tick off, have I answered those 6 doing elements of that question? Have I told you how our care plans are individually tailored? Have I told you how they're person-centred or will be person-centred? Have I told you how we will meet the needs and outcomes of the person? And if you do that in a methodical way, actually, you can really increase your ability to score well because you are answering each part of the question and you're evidencing those answers. And because we're going to link back to the specification, we might know from the spec then what person-centred means to that particular organisation or how they treat partners, what they mean by a partner. If you have any need to clarify any points of information, you can ask a clarification question. But that allows us to break down the question. We can see on there that it's 600 words constraint, so we can't go over. We've got no attachments, and it scores 25% of all of the scores available. So those weightings allow us to frame where we want most of our effort. And I think actually, if we were answering all of those 6 parts of that question, we would be using all of our 600 words. And we might actually use more and then pare back a little bit. But that shows us actually how we might approach answering a question. And we will do the same for question 2 and question 3. You'll see on question 3 that it's for information only, so it's not being scored. It has the lowest word count. It has 2 verb elements in it. Now, it's not being scored, and so it actually won't affect your overall score. So if you're putting your effort proportionately in here, you put most of your effort in question number 1, the next on question number 2, and then less so on question number 3, because it won't affect your score. And where we really want to get our highest scores is where the highest weightings are. So if we keep that in mind, because technology can't replace our knowledge of our businesses. It can't replace our knowledge of the process of bidding. So what are we being scored on and how do we want to approach that? But it can help us build on our knowledge and our business information and intelligence. It can help us to see if we've got any gaps in what we've written down. It can help us do a better job if we use it really well. So these last few slides, with those last couple of slides, sorry, in mind, we'll focus over the next 2 or 3 slides on NAI in procurement, both sides. So when it comes to using artificial intelligence, there was a procurement policy note, PPN 0224, that laid down some really clear guidelines for both buyers and suppliers. You can go onto gov.uk and you can look at all of the policy notes. But if you want to go and have a look, if you just put into a search engine procurement policy note 0224, it will take you straight there. So for suppliers using AI to help write bids, the things to remember are it must still be an accurate and fair reflection of what your organisation actually does or will do. AI can generate polished text, but it can't and shouldn't invent capabilities that you don't have. So you must answer the specific questions in detail and provide accurate and verifiable evidence. And it's also essential to observe all of those constraints that we talked about, but also to ensure that there's no even inadvertent copyright or intellectual property rights issues in that AI generated content. I find personally as an AI user that it's an iterative process. It's not a magic button that replaces the need for our deep understanding of our business, what we're trying to achieve, those outcomes that we're trying to deliver, or those tailored responses. It can't and shouldn't do everything for us, but it can certainly get us started quickly and it can overcome that blank page syndrome and it can help us work more efficiently. And that can be really useful for smaller organizations. The human element, your unique expertise, understanding of the local context, understanding of your own organization, whether you're a buyer or supplier, that remains your greatest asset. Using that well in conjunction with AI can help you submit good tender responses. My network of procurement colleagues, there is often some eye rolling and eyebrow raising, and procurement colleagues will tell me that they can spot AI a mile off. If AI is used well, you shouldn't be able to spot it because it should look and feel like you. It should be in your tone of voice and it should be a reflection of you, your intelligence, your content, your commitments, your ability, but using AI to help pull it together. And so, actually, my personal view, rightly or wrongly, if you think you can spot AI, and sometimes you can, to be fair, then actually it probably hasn't been used in the way that it could be used for best advantage. In using AI, you might be asked to declare it in some tenders. I have a bit of an issue with that because AI, in and of itself, is just in so many things. So, my colleague always says, well, if you're using a spell checker, that's AI driven. So do we have to declare even that? Generally, if you're asked to declare use of AI, it means whether you're using it to write the content of your bid. And often when you're asked to declare it, and in fact, in all the cases that I know where you're asked to declare it, evaluators are not told whether AI has been used or not. And that's to avoid any conscious or unconscious bias based on AI. If we zoom out a bit, actually, and think about AI in the broader procurement landscape, so many people think that AI in procurement is simply a plug and play solution, and it isn't. AI is not magic, it's actually engineering. And I'm taking this from an organization called Love Me Tender that Go for Growth works with, and I am part of. AI is not replacing procurement professionals, but it is forcing us to rethink how we design, decide, and deliver our services. So, the goal of AI in procurement is not just faster processes, but better decisions, reduced risk, and solid transparency and accountability throughout. The real challenge lies in the implementation of AI in procurement. So we have to balance the drive for innovation with the absolute necessities of compliance, transparency, and fairness, especially in public sector regulated context. As the quote on the slide suggests, we have to engineer trust. What we can't do and shouldn't do is just feed data into a large language model and hope for the best. Both suppliers and buyers need to engage with any digital tools, including AI, thoughtfully, understanding their limitations as well as their potential. And in our work with Love Me Tender, actually what Love Me Tender are doing is hosting a year-long research project on using AI in procurement, specifically focusing on procurement evaluations and bid reviews for suppliers. But that research is all about actually understanding how we use these tools in a thoughtful, ethical, and valuable way to enhance the human oversight and the human participation, and also make sure that humans are adding as much value as they possibly can. And so, how do we practically and safely use AI if we're a supplier in a bid or a tender? So I've talked a little bit about this already. You can use the AI to help you start drafting your answers. It can be super fantastic for overcoming that initial hurdle of where do I start? I'm staring at a blank page. I know this stuff, but how do I actually start writing it down? However, I will always come back to time and time and time again, the output is only as good as the input, the prompt. There is a whole career now that people can have in prompt engineering for AI. So we have to make sure that we give the AI good, accurate information, good data about the company, about the specific tender requirements. It is the same as I said at the top of this presentation. If if you put bad data in, you will get bad data out. It's the same with AI. If we don't give AI platforms good information, it will spit out less than reasonable results for us. And we must always check the generated content. We want to refine that content so that it reflects our true voice and our reality. AI can sometimes hallucinate or sound overly confident about things, and it can create assumptions or summaries that aren't quite the reflection of the reality that we want it to be. And so the message is actually play around with it, but if you're not entirely comfortable with the content, don't use it, change it. You can also consider how AI can help you review your answers. So you might choose not to use it in the writing stage. You might choose to use it in the review stage. You might choose to use it in both, of course. But you can feed your draft response and the original question, the specification, all of that stuff into an AI tool. And the right tool is crucial, but you can feed it in and say, did I fully answer this question? Is it clear? Is it evidenced? So it can act as a helpful critical friend. And if that feels like something that would be useful to you, I've got some more information on the next slide about the final read that Love Me Tender are doing. This is an AI-supported bid review tool designed specifically to help suppliers. So it checks your draft responses against the specification, the evaluation criteria, and any of the question and answer documents. It will flag gaps, risks, missed requirements, and do all of that before you hit the submit button. But crucially, it's run by the humans in Love Me Tender, who collectively have over 70 years' experience in procurement across the team. And so it hits that sweet spot of blending the best of technology and human interaction. And why does that matter? Well, actually, what public procurement is about, what Go for Growth is about, is supporting accessible competition. So it can help level the playing field, particularly for smaller organisations or voluntary sector organisations who won't have dedicated bid teams or bid review teams. And it can therefore allow smaller organisations to compete effectively in that marketplace. It also provides a secure and governed environment. It's programmed with both the European regulations and the Procurement Act regulations in mind. So it's got all of that regulated governance in there, reducing reliance on open public AI tools where you might inadvertently share sensitive company data. So using the right tool is really important. And of course, this isn't the only one in town. There are other AI bid review tools out there as well. But if this is one that you would like to explore more, you can use the link on the screen, or you can email the team for some more information. But I think the message on AI finally is we shouldn't be afraid of AI, whether we're a buyer or a supplier. We are in the middle of a digital revolution. We are finding our fit for technology. It won't replace humans. So that real sweet spot blend of human insight, human oversight, human intervention with technology means actually that some magic can happen and that we can all upskill and we can have better quality procurements going out into the market with better responses coming in, and we can access a whole market, because the time to bid can be reduced if we use technology better. And that can often be the difference between I am going to put my hat in the ring versus I don't have time to put my hat in the ring. And so it can be really transformational when we're thinking about market access and opening markets up to competition. Final thing to say is we know whether you're a buyer, a head of procurement, a chief procurement officer, a small organisation, a large enterprise organisation bidding for the public sector, it can often feel a really challenging and sometimes really lonely place to be. Go for Growth is a social enterprise, and so we are dedicated to creating impact. And we have so far helped over 27,000 organisations, of which the vast majority have been micro or SME, as well as voluntary sector organisations, over 78,000 engagements. And we're seeing a 70% increase in competition engagement and a 30% increase in awarded business to smaller organisations. So please feel free to reach out to Go for Growth if we can be of any help or any assistance. Our contact details are on the slide. We have more events and more workshops and webinars coming up. You can stay in touch with us through our social media pages, or you can email us or give me a call for a chat. But we are here to help, so please feel free to use us as much as you would like. And if you would like to, we're very light on our comms that come out in our newsletter. Once a quarter, we'll write to you about what we think is the hottest topics in procurement that will be useful to you as either a buyer or a supplier. So if you'd like to stay in touch with us, you can sign up to our newsletter. We don't write to you if you say no, or you don't opt in, and you can opt out. And that's so thank you for listening. I hope that that was a useful, although whistle-stop tour, no doubt, through digital technology and data in procurement. Hopefully that's been useful for everyone. I will stop sharing and just see if we've got any questions. I can't see anything in the Q&A or in the chat. Oh, I've just seen how full of this my face the screen is. If anybody does want to have a conversation with Go for Growth, those contact details will be there. I will send a copy of the recording out and the slide deck. It usually comes out within about 48 hours of finishing the webinar. So you should have it by close of business tomorrow, Monday at the very, very latest. So please do feel free to get in touch. And if there aren't any questions in the chat or the Q&A, I will not hold everyone up. Have a fabulous rest of your Thursday. I can see we've got a raised hand. Does anybody want to pop something in the chat? Or I don't know if that was an issue at all, or an error even. Okay. All right. Doesn't seem to be anything there. If you do have any questions and you want to chat with me separately, please do give me a shout. Thank you. Have a great rest of your Thursday, and hopefully I'll see you on another Go for Growth event soon. Take care, everyone. Thank you.